77 WABC invites you to a family fun day and softball showdown on July 20th with net proceeds benefiting Shriners Children's. John Sterling will call the game as the FDNY takes on the NYPD with special guests Dwight Gooden, Art Shamsky, 77 WABC hosts including Sid Rosenberg, Anthony Cumia, Lionel, Dominic Carter, and many more. For more info and to buy tickets, go to ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org. That's ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org. The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are entering the Stone Zone. Exciting political news. Eric Trump, the presidential son, tells the Financial Times that he himself has not ruled out a race for president in 2028. I think the political path would be an easy one, he said. I know I could do it. Would I want my kids to live the same experience? Only time will tell. Another Trump on the ballot in 2028? I, for one, love it. In the meantime, his wife, Lara Trump, is now considering a race for the U.S. Senate in Tennessee. That's where the rhino Thom Tillis announced after voting against the big, beautiful bill in the U.S. Senate that he would not stand for re-election. Now, on this show months ago, when Tillis voted against Ed Martin, also known as Eagle Ed Martin, to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, I called for Lara Trump to challenge Tillis. Now I believe Lara Trump is in an excellent position, not only to win the Republican nomination, but to hold that seat for the Republicans. All news seems to be Trump today. President Donald Trump yesterday called on Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell for artificially inflating interest rates and said they should be less than half of what they are right now. We have a bad Fed chairman, but other than that, it doesn't even matter. The numbers are so good, it doesn't matter that he keeps the rates artificially high. That's what Trump said on Sunday. We should be at 1 or 2%. The sad truth is, of course, that Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve cut rates in order to facilitate Joe Biden's reelection when the inflation rate was quite different than today. It was even lower. So the politics of what Powell is doing, I think, is abundantly clear. Meanwhile, the New York Post reports that Chairman Powell probably lied to Congress about the $2.5 billion that they are using to revamp the central bank's palatial Washington headquarters. Yes, you heard me right. $2.5 billion paid for by, yes, you've got it, the taxpayers. Powell said when he was asked by Senator Tim Scott, the Republican of South Carolina, about the grilling, that there was no VIP dining room, there is no new marble, there are no new special elevators. Powell said under questioning from a powerful panel on Wednesday. There's no new water features, no new beehives, and there's no roof terrace gardens. But Powell, who is meanwhile facing heat from President Trump over his failure to slash interest rates, directly contradicted the project's own planning documents, which were signed off by the government in 2021. At this point, the American people need a cut in interest rates to facilitate the purchase of a home, the purchase of a car. It's across the board. The people, the taxpayers, seem to be left in the lurch here. Today on Truth Social, the president again hammered Powell, posting a list of world central bank rates, highlighting Switzerland and Japan as the top, with interest rates of 0.25 and 0.5 respectively, saying with a note, this is where we should be. Jerome, too late Powell, and his entire board should be ashamed of themselves for allowing this to happen to the United States, wrote President Trump. They have only one easiest and most prestigious jobs in America, and they have failed, and they continue to do so. If they were doing their job properly, our country would be saving trillions of dollars in interest costs. The board just sits there and watches, so they are equally to blame. We should be paying 1% interest or better, said the president. Interestingly, the bottom of the list, the United States sits next to Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea at a current rate of 4.5%. Trump also hand-wrote on the list, "Jerome, you are, as usual, too late. You have cost the USA a fortune, and you continue to do so. Our rate should be lower by a lot. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being lost. There is virtually no inflation." Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is one of the standouts of the Trump cabinet in my view, outlined yesterday the options to replace Federal Reserve Jerome Powell as chairman. One option being contemplated by the administration, Bessent said, is that President Trump appoints a new person to the Fed's Board of Governors to fill a 14-year seat that opens up with the scheduled departure of Fed Governor Adriana Kugler on January 31st. And that person will go on to be chair when Powell leaves in May. Or, said Bessent, we could appoint the new chair in May directly. Unfortunately, that's just a 2-year seat. Last night on Truth Social, President Trump pointed out how much the administration has already done about the high price and markets that were handed to him by the Biden administration. The Trump administration has gotten costs down very substantially for the American consumer, said President Trump. There's never been anything quite like this. Meanwhile, President Trump announced that he will be attending the opening of the so-called Alligator Alcatraz Detention Center in Florida this week. The president's move comes as his administration and the state of Florida seek to build a remote detention center to house illegal immigrants as they await deportation. The site is expected to open with a soft-sided holding units for hundreds of detainees through a partnership where the federal government provides the funding and the Florida Division of Emergency Management oversees its build-out and its everyday management. Additional holding units will be added through next month, according to this joint agreement. The facility is projected to cost about $450 million a year, which will come from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, specifically their Shelter and Services Program that was used to house asylum seekers during the Biden administration. The facility will reportedly hold migrants arrested in Florida and migrants transferred by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, known as ICE, from other parts of the country. The president plans to join the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, as well as Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida for the opening tomorrow. President Trump is also threatened to cut New York City's funding if the voters elect a lunatic as mayor. In the wake of communist and Islamic radical New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani's Democratic primary win, speculation has abounded regarding what could become the nation's most populous city if a full-on socialist wins the general election. President Trump has certainly not shied away from his own criticism of Mamdani. This weekend, he issued a clear warning to the Big Apple should its voters choose to elect a radical candidate to replace the current Democrat mayor, Eric Adams. The president said, and I quote, "He's a communist. I think it's very bad for New York. I don't know what he's going to get in, but he's a communist and he's a pure communist. But let me say this. If he does get in, I'm going to be president. He's going to have to do the right thing or he won't be getting any money. He's got to do the right thing." It's not really clear what the president meant by that, but we did see where the Democrat candidate, Mr. Mamdani, specifically said that white taxpayers should pay more than everyone else. That's, by the way, highly unconstitutional and quite illegal. Trump once said he never believed the country would elect a socialist. It's shocking that I would have assumed that, but I used to say we will never have a socialist country. No, perhaps not, but we will have a communist because he, Mamdani, is a communist, and it's likely that he will be mayor. So I was very surprised when I said I never heard of him. I don't know who he is. He's a radical left lunatic. That's who he is. In all honesty, the Mamdani phenomena is based on younger voters, many of whom don't really even know what the candidate stands for. very much like Barack Obama, promising hope and change, and in a weird way, kind of like Donald Trump running as an outsider against an entrenched, broken system. Mamdani is poised to be the front runner in the current race for mayor. And he could very well have a split opposition. At this juncture, I do not see the Republican candidate, Curtis Sliwa, the current incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, who's now running as an independent, and quite possibly former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who also filed as independent, dropping out of the race. This three-way split could clear the way for the election of a radical leftist mayor who has openly said that he wants to defund the police and release everyone in Rikers Island, because he says that violence is a construct, whatever that means. I find it extraordinarily dangerous. And probably the biggest win yet for the Trump administration, the Supreme Court ruled last Friday that the use of nationwide injunctions is no longer permissible. In other words, having a local district judge issue this sweeping order that affects the entire country is unconstitutional. In a widely anticipated decision stemming from President Trump's executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship, the High Court finally said that universal orders likely exceed the equitable authority that Congress has granted to the federal courts. Shockingly, Justice Amy Coney Barrett authored the majority opinion for the 6-3 court decision, with the liberal justices in dissent. The court granted the Trump administration's request to narrow the reach of the injunctions blocking the president's executive order while proceeding to move forward, only to the extent that the injunctions are broader than necessary to provide complete relief. We have seen this again and again. Local district court judges ruling that the president doesn't have the authority to deport dangerous criminal illegals. We saw another district court arguing that the president does not have the authority to negotiate tariff deals with other countries. This is nothing less than judicial tyranny. It is nothing less than leftist groups who bring these lawsuits, forum shopping to find a friendly left-wing partisan judge, and trying to block the mandate of the American people in the last presidential election. This is perhaps the biggest win for Donald Trump, and it clears the way for him to implement the America First agenda. Interesting to see the Supreme Court and the way it came down. The left is going crazy because this really was their last stand. At a White House press conference, President Trump praised this as a monumental victory for the Constitution, separation of powers, and, yes, the rule of law. The court's ruling came in a trio of emergency appeals by the Trump administration arising out of the president's executive orders seeking to end the 14th Amendment's guarantee of birthright citizenship, which means that everyone born in the United States is a citizen regardless of their parents' immigration status. We understand that there were people who came here who were not U.S. citizens, who came to the United States long enough to have a birth so that that child could become a U.S. citizen and get all the benefits therefor. The Justice Department has asked the Supreme Court to narrow the scope of these three separate injunctions that block the implementation of the president's policy regarding legal challenges brought by 22 states, immigrants' rights groups, and 7 individuals. This was a smashing victory for the U.S. Constitution and the rule of law. I'm Roger Stone. This is the Stone Zone. Whatever you do, please don't touch that dial because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
77 WABC invites you to a family fun day and softball showdown on July 20th with net proceeds benefiting Shriners Children's. John Sterling will call the game as the FDNY takes on the NYPD with special guests Dwight Gooden, Art Shamsky, 77 WABC hosts including Sid Rosenberg, Anthony Cumia, Lionel, Dominic Carter, and many more. For more info and to buy tickets, go to ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org. That's ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org.
Greg Kelly here for Colonial Metals Group, China's leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II, one that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Go to freegoldguide.com/Kelly or call 800-655-5186 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.
The Stone Zone
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Over the weekend, the Senate advanced the budget reconciliation legislation over the big, beautiful bill, with Vice President J.D. Vance coming in to break a tie. It passed 51-49. The big, beautiful bill is now one step closer to funding ICE, cutting taxes, and advancing President Trump's agenda. As I have pointed out on this show and in the Stone Zone repeatedly, that the tax cut alone is the biggest single tax cut in American history. It was originally passed during President Donald Trump's first term, but it has to be renewed and to go into effect in January. Let's look at it the other way around. If this bill does not pass, the American people will have a 68% increase in federal income tax rates. And no, the tax cuts are not just for the rich. You've been listening to Bernie Sanders, if you believe that. They're for all Americans. If you look at it historically, every time we have cut federal income tax rates, whether it was under Donald Trump, whether it was under Ronald Reagan, or whether it was under John F. Kennedy, there's actually been a surge in federal revenues. So those liberals like Robert Reich, I went to high school with that guy. Remember him? He was, I think, the Secretary of Commerce under Bill Clinton. He insists that our deficits are caused by tax cuts on the American people. No, deficits and inflation are caused by too much spending. Now, there is no question that we do need to cut spending in addition to the tax cuts that are encompassed in the big, beautiful bill. But at the same time, we also do away with the tax on tips, the tax on Social Security, and we include a tax credit for those folks who go out and buy a car or a truck that was made in America. The big, beautiful bill is not perfect. Nobody says it is. I particularly object to the sections regarding artificial intelligence and restricting the states from regulating it for a 10-year period. I've been a victim of artificial intelligence. You can see dozens of videos online of me saying things that, well, I never actually said. It's pretty scary, and it has to be regulated, in my opinion. But it is crucial that we pass the big, beautiful bill. Also included in there is the funding for what President Trump calls the Golden Dome. That is the Strategic Defense Initiative that will protect America from incoming ICBM missiles, an absolute necessity. You're listening to The Stone Zone. We'll be right back with Kenny Cody. He's the opinion editor of Human Events, also serves as the chairman of his local Republican Party in Tennessee. He's going to talk to us about the Panicans and how President Trump has prosecuted the war with Iran. I think it has been brilliant because it is not about regime change. It is not about boots on the ground. It is not about endless war, but it is about effectively stopping the Iranians from having a nuclear weapon that they would share with their proxies.
The Stone Zone
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. I'm your genial host, Roger Stone. Joining me now is Kenny Cody. He's the opinion editor for Human Events, one of the most influential conservative media outlets in the country, going all the way back to the days of Barry Goldwater. And he also serves as chairman of the Cobb County, Tennessee Republican Party. He's written for various conservative outlets, including the Washington Examiner, the Daily Wire, Town Hall, Newsweek, and many others. You've seen him with Jack Posobiec. You've seen him with Matt Gaetz. But today we have him in the Stone Zone. Kenny, welcome.
Hey, Mr. Stone. How are you, brother?
It's great to be with you. I'll tell you one thing I find disconcerting. I can understand debate within the MAGA constituency, which is, let's face it, much larger than the Republican Party, prior to the president making a very difficult decision, but keeping his word and deciding to strike Iran to stop them from having a nuclear bomb. He said 15 times during the campaign that he would not allow the Iranians to develop a nuclear weapon. And Donald Trump is a man who says what he means and means what he says. There was a healthy debate inside the MAGA community because, let's face it, the president ran as the peace candidate. He ran as an opponent to endless foreign war. When he was in Riyadh recently, he specifically denounced a foreign policy based on regime change, which has clearly not worked. But now, in the wake of what I think was the correct decision, and by reading your latest piece at Human Events, you agree with me, what I see is infighting in the ranks. You see Mark Levin attacking Steve Bannon. You see Laura Loomer attacking Tulsi Gabbard. You see Tucker Carlson being attacked all the way around. I think this is counterproductive now. I think it is time to rally around the commander-in-chief, who I think has made the right decision. I support the president, and I come from that Ron Paul wing of the Republican Party that says that I'm a non-interventionist. I'm not a big fan of the neocons, certainly not a big fan of the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan. Look, I'm the guy who wrote The Bush Crime Family as a book, which you can still get online. So how do you see this, I don't want to call it a fissure, but this disagreement in the family that is MAGA?
Well, I think there's a big difference between the debate before the strikes and afterwards. So beforehand, I understand the idea that we didn't want to have war with Iran. We didn't want to put troops on the ground, boots on the ground over in Iran, have that regime change term and have that regime change war that so many neocons and those who are part of those war crime families that we talk about all the time. But after the strikes, I think it's pretty clear to see we did our job. We took out the nuclear facilities. We made those certain strikes. We brought peace to the table. We have a ceasefire with Iran and Israel now. And I think that we have came to a point where that was okay. Now, after the strikes, you saw all those conversations, we shouldn't have done the strikes. We should have struck it all. And I think that's nonsense. I enjoyed the debate that we were kind of talking about before all of that happened. I think that, during Trump's first term, he had people around him that probably didn't want war. You had people like Rex Tillerson. You had people like John Bolton that were in that first Trump cabinet that were going to push for regime change. They were going to push for boots on the ground in terms of foreign policy. But now you have a minds of level heads that are currently in the Trump administration. They are going to make only the moves. They're going to bring peace to the United States, peace in the Middle East, and broker deals that are going to be fair in terms of American foreign policy. And now I think these conversations are counterproductive. I think before big decisions like this, before those are made, those are when those debates and conversations need to be had. No war with Iran. We need to come to a peace agreement. We need to broker peace. All those things are good. But after those things have happened, after the strikes, and when it's clear that we're not going to have a regime change foreign policy, what is the use of now calling these strikes a mistake? These have obviously worked. They're obviously successful. And Martin needs to quit infighting and support the president's move because it has worked and it's going to eventually broker peace if it hasn't already between Iran and Israel.
I could not agree more. I mean, look, the president has been very measured. He did not take out their oil refineries. He did not take out their capacity to continue to sell fuel. He did not hit the Ayatollah with a drone, which, based on the technology used in the takedown of Soleimani, I'm sure he could do because he's a religious leader. And it was interesting that within hours of the strike, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the president were both calling for the Iranians to come back to the peace table. Donald Trump prefers a negotiation over chaos. He prefers commerce over chaos, and he proved it yet again. So this limited operation, which I agree with you was extraordinarily successful, should be supported by all Americans. Now, Natasha Bertrand, who is perhaps the single most dishonest, quote-unquote, reporter, now with CNN, someone who was being fed constantly by the rogue CIA operative and director John Brennan, a woman who got the cell phone for special counsel John Durham and would badger him. She's one of those who pushed relentlessly the Russian collusion hoax. She's one of those who said that 51 intelligence officers, current and former, said that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. She's essentially a congenital liar. She's a Democrat operative. She actually admitted to me in an email that Congressman Eric Swalwell was in violation of both the law and the House rules, sharing my classified testimony with her, trying to nitpick me about it. She claims that CNN has some source that tells them that the strikes on the Iranian facilities in 3 locations in Iran were ineffective and that we did not take down their capacity to build a nuclear weapon. I think this lie. I also think that whoever, if they really have a source, who knows if they really do? Sometimes they just make this stuff up, but whoever is supplying that information from inside the government, they're breaking the law. They ought to be found and they ought to be prosecuted. What do you think?
Absolutely. And this is the entire idea of why the mainstream media is dishonest. And be honest, Stone, I have no idea who leaked that information, but if I had to make an educated guess, it's those that want regime change wars. They want us to do more bombings. They want us to be more infiltrated. They want us to attack those oil refineries, as you just mentioned, and they want further war, whether it's to line their own pockets with the military-industrial complex, whether that is to just solely because they're bloodthirsty and want more war, because all neocons are not done in Washington. Now I think Pete Hegseth has done a great job in the Department of Defense. Marco Rubio has done a great job as Secretary of State and every other position that he's accumulated while being in office. But there are still those agents within the federal government that want us to push for regime change, that want us to be the world police, that they want to go so much further than those strikes that we performed in Iran. Now, I think those were, like I said, sufficient. I think they were successful. I think that that's going to broker a peace deal between Iran, Israel, and we'll see what other countries come to the table during the Abraham Accords. But there are those in the federal government that are trying to dissuade the media into calling these non-significant strikes, that we need further action, that we need boots on the ground, need to strike oil refineries, need to go after the supreme leader. All of those things are still on the table for those neocons still in the Department of Defense and other sectors of Washington. But I think that it is so clear that the media is still the earpiece of those establishment neocons. They are looking for any reason to dissuade Trump, to seem like his actions and his decisions are so non-effective when it comes to this foreign policy. But it has worked, and they can't stand that. They cannot stand that this one move has basically disabled all of Iranian nuclear capabilities, at least for the next few decades. They can't stand it. They wanted to use this reason to get into another war, to make Trump look weak. If he doesn't go and have further steps, we're going to look weak. They cannot stand that this has been successful. They can't stand that their pockets are not going to be filled with the blood money from the military-industrial complex, and they're furious. And that's why they're using people like Jennifer Griffin. They're using people that are mainstream media earpieces that are trying to dissuade the Trump agenda. And the Trump agenda is America first, is the military-industrial complex last, and it is peace through strength.
Yeah, Kenny, look, I know that I don't get my news from CNN for the same reason I don't drink out of the toilet. And I saw speculation that Mark Warner, the the millionaire senator from Virginia who bought himself the governorship and then a Senate seat, and who was a constant leaker during the Russian collusion hoax, and who produced a Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian collusion. There are 19 references to me in that report. Every one of them is false. It's a cut and paste job. Just because something is reported by the Huffington Post doesn't make it true, Senator. This guy's been caught leaking before, caught red-handed. My sources tell me that this is where this information came from. But you're right. The American people, and they show it in the ratings. They're not believing CNN. They're certainly not believing MSNBC. I mean, yesterday I was in a Barnes & Noble, which, by the way, they're opening a bunch of new stores. That's really good news, bookstores again. And I saw the new book by Rachel Maddow, and it's about America's headlong movement towards fascism. Now, you have to stop for a minute and say, well, wait a minute. The people who try to keep candidates off the ballot, the people who try to put their political opponents in jail, the people who try to censor free speech, the people who jail American citizens over their religious beliefs, they are the fascists. She is a fascist. It's absolutely true. It's right out of Alinsky's rules. Remember, they always accuse us of exactly what they themselves are doing. And as the great Ronald Reagan said, if fascism ever comes to America, it will come in the guise of liberalism. Absolutely true.
Absolutely. And you know, the fascists are the ones that are trying to silence the majority. You know, we use populism and nationalism to such a successful extent that the left can't stand it because, you know, they're always the party of the working man. They're always the party of the voice of the voiceless. And now that MAGA has taken control of the Republican Party, we are now in control of looking to the mainstream narrative, looking to the independent voices, looking at those who are sharing the issues that are most central to them. And MAGA is using that to connect with Generation Z. We're using that to connect with independent voters, union workers, those who will never vote Republican in their lifetime unless they were actually spoken to in the way the Republican Party currently does because of MAGA. And they can't stand that, Mr. Stone. They cannot stand the fact that we are actually getting through to the people because we were always the party of the country clubs, the bankers, Wall Street. But now we're the party of the working man, and that's what they're calling us fascists because we're using populism and nationalism to our advantage to get through to the American people. They're the ones that are calling us fascists when we're the ones giving access to free speech. We're the ones that are providing alternative citizen-ran media to the general public instead of the mainstream media narrative that is controlled by corporations, by mainstream media, and by those deep state federal agents that are trying to use the mainstream media as mouthpieces for their agenda. We are actually talking to the American people. We're going out to the streets, ensuring what kind of issues are the most central to what they want to see in political activism, and we're succeeding. That's why we're the fascists to them. We're not using government power as they did against us. We're trying to actually involve the American voter in foreign policy, in domestic policy, and in every single policy that MAGA stands for, and they cannot stand that. That's exactly what they're calling us fascists.
Yeah, I think it is continues to be a mistake to view our American politics now in terms of Republicans and Democrats. That's really not the divide in America. It is really a divide between the authoritarian left and everybody else with common sense. President Trump forged a new coalition, a new governing coalition that starts with Republicans but adds independents and disaffected common sense Democrats like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., formerly Tulsi Gabbard, Governor Rod Blagojevich, and others in this new working majority. And then, of course, he made extraordinary inroads among Hispanic Americans, among Black Americans, among younger Americans. They see a new political dynamic, and it scares the daylights out of them. Thematically, interestingly enough, Zoran Mamdani has tried to, I think, harness that same outsider energy while at the same time masking the authoritarian and very dangerous nature of his actual plans for the Big Apple. If you're just tuning in, folks, we're talking to Kenny Cody. He is the opinion editor for Human Events. and we're breaking down the politics of the day. You're in the Stone Zone. It's the place to be. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with Kenny Cody, and we're going to talk about the significance of this new Supreme Court ruling that says that lower court judges can no longer issue universal nationwide injunctions to try to stop the president from carrying out the mandate of the 2024 election. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial, because yes, indeed, we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. We're talking to Kenny Cody. He's the opinion editor at Human Events. And we're talking about the political news of the day. The big, beautiful bill is getting closer to passing Congress. Kenny, I think this bill is crucial. No one said it's perfect, but it's going to be improved in conference. The way this works, it would have to pass the Senate, then go to a full vote of the Senate, then ultimately go to conference, gets smoothed out in terms of the version passed by the House, and then it goes back to the House for repassage, and we would have the biggest tax cut in American history re-upped for January. I think there's things in this bill I don't love, but I'm hoping that they will get eliminated in the process. But so far, so good. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's central to the America First agenda. I mean, when we're talking about extending the biggest tax cuts in American history, we're talking about funding for mass deportations. We're talking about things that are included in that bill. Is everything that Trump ran on. You know, one of the main things that he campaigned on was that one big, beautiful bill statement. He said, we're not going to pass all these individual bills that are going to take into the third or fourth years of my presidency for us to implement, because it might get killed, especially after the midterms. So he wanted to get all this done within the first 2 years, within really the first few months of his presidency. And like you said, we're going to have to cut some fat. You know, in this process, going back and forth from the Senate to the House, you're going to hope some things are kicked off. But this is going to be as good as you can get. You know, no piece of American legislation with Congress is ever going to be perfect. But I think this state accomplishes all that we need to accomplish. And when you put it on a scale, it's going to be far more positive for the American people than it's going to be negative. So I think it's a great bill. I think it's as good as that we can get, and I hope some things are cut off in between the transactions from the Senate to the House.
I don't get too many guests who are in Generation Z. You've discussed how Generation Z wants to be able to land a job after they graduate college or high school, and the Republican Party really needs to speak to those concerns. What measures do you think would create greater opportunity with these younger voters?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like I was talking about earlier, Mr. Stone. It's just that usage of populism. I mean, I know you mentioned at the end of the last break that Mamdani in New York is much of a communist, Marxist, radical Muslim that he is. He used populism to his advantage, and he used the simple issues such as reducing India dishes from $10 to $8 and rent control. Making groceries cheaper through communism, but making groceries cheaper and products cheaper for the citizens of New York. These are things that are at least somewhat popular with Generation Z that are trying to get jobs, that are trying to get an apartment, trying to get a house, trying to live in a crowded city that has high taxes and high regulation. And I think that in that kind of same way, MAGA and the GOP and the conservative movement need to continue to utilize populism, because as I've talked about it a lot before in the last few years. Populism isn't an ideology, it's a tool. It's a way to try to funnel ideas to get through to those voters that would not listen otherwise. Generation Z, independents, working class voters listen to populist standpoints and at least communicate with upper class or high-end politicians through populist tropes. And if you're able to find out which issues are central to Generation Z, such as getting jobs, housing prices, what job are they going to be able to get after they graduate college or after they go to a trade school? What jobs are they going to be able to get? Are they going to be able to have a sustainable future for their families through American prosperity? Those things are what matter to Generation Z. Having a job, having a family, and trying to ensure that nuclear family is sustained through funds, through income, and through a good living situation through whatever region they might live in the country. So MAGA needs to continue to use populism to get through to Generation Z in the same way they've used it to get through to working class voters. I think Vance, Hawley, Trump, and so many others have done a very good job in using those populist mantras to get to the working class. And now we need to use populism to get through to Generation Z.
All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I want to thank our guest, Kenny Cody, who's the opinion editor for Human Events. Thank all of you for tuning in to the Stone Zone, where we try to bring you the stone cold truth.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
77 WABC invites you to a family fun day and softball showdown on July 20th with net proceeds benefiting Shriners Children's. John Sterling will call the game as the FDNY takes on the NYPD with special guests Dwight Gooden, Art Shamsky, 77 WABC hosts including Sid Rosenberg, Anthony Cumia, Lionel, Dominic Carter, and many more. For more info and to buy tickets, go to ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org. That's ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org.